Well, Amy, thank you so much for being with us today. So, as you pull up
Thank
your
you.
slides, could you give us a self-introduction?
Sure. I am Amy Nash. I'm the market manager at Morgan Stanley, which means I oversee all of the wealth management branches throughout Middle Tennessee. I've been with Morgan Stanley my entire career, which is 25 years, and I've been managing individuals for the past 15. So while I'm pulling up my deck, I will share, I think, what is a pivotal point in my career. So I got a regional role in 2013, and that particular role for me was important because I realized two things. I realized that I had a new perspective. Being at a higher level, I started to see the bigger picture, and it permanently changed my thinking. And then the second thing that happened, just based on my approach, I was able to change a couple of nationwide policies, firm-wide policies. And I think for the first time, I really started to understand that I personally could have an impact on policy and people. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share what I've done since I had those two realizations. So early in my career, I had done a presentation on leading with empathy. And so to start, I think I'll tell you what it means to me, why I think it's important. We'll talk a little bit about environments and how empathy impacts environments, and then we'll do a couple takeaways. So to me, I believe empathy and leadership is the ability to understand another person and then lead, motivate, or inspire them based on this understanding of them. I think it's comprehending and treating others with kindness, which results in healthy communication. I think it's truly understanding what it is to be human. I think the culture creates an environment that employees feel like it's safe to share ideas and they feel this sense of belonging and purpose. It's truly a shift to a growth mindset. So I shared a couple of attributes I think empathetic leaders share. And I think in looking at this slide, most of us are probably thinking that's the type of manager that I'd be happy to work for. So early in my career, I thought caring and being empathetic meant that I was weak. I thought that maybe others viewed me as being too soft. And so probably a little less than 10 years ago, I was tapped by two managers to present to my peers, a group of branch managers, on the topic of empathy and leadership. We had titled the presentation, Building Trust and Loyalty. And the first manager told me, I really think you're the right person to do this because you have this authenticity that just comes through in everything that you do and all of your interactions. And he's like, I'd really like for you to tell people how to be authentic to themselves. And the other manager said he felt inspired because I had this way of speaking to individuals about their roles and responsibilities, even though I'd never been in those roles. And so, in his words, I could represent that I'd been in their shoes, even though I had never been in their shoes. And at the time, I recall I focused on personal touches and building culture. I described activities that I had done that had received positive outcomes or feedback. I described it as authentic care. And I tried to explain that it was a skill of emotional intelligence. And if they would buy in, they would experience an increase in cooperation. The approach leads to meaningful relationships. It creates trust. Both managers and the employee feel valued. I'd add today, in the post-COVID world that we live in, it creates stronger work-life balance, which is important. An empathetic approach is respect for one another. I think it demonstrates respect. So I'll tell you, in the short term, it created a scurry of activity, handwritten notes, personalized recognition, phone calls in place of emails. I did appreciate the effort, but overall, I did not feel like the presentation was successful in communicating the message. I just think I didn't use the right words. I can tell you now I guess I thought if I told other managers to simply show you care, that they would. But what I didn't realize is some managers don't care. And so I focus so much on my why I do what I do and how meaningful relationships are important to me and how I accomplish that. I didn't spend enough time talking about the how. And so I can tell you over the last 8 or 9 years, I've definitely figured out how to focus on the how instead of the why. So we're going to talk for just a minute about this communication style. Okay. So let's see. I view this as a communication strategy. I believe that you approach any situation with empathy, the outcome will be positive. I do coach and mentor some people in our organization, and it's funny, they sort of describe it as their inner Amy. They'll call me and say, I had to have a difficult conversation today, and I really had to lean into my inner Amy to use the right words. But what I really help them reach is a change in perspective. I've helped them see the value of communicating with kindness, and that understanding helps them tailor arrangements that sort of benefit everyone involved. I think this type of communication involves 4 components. So the first 2 of these components to me are kind of at the onset, actively listening. And it's funny because these are words I've heard all of you say during these presentations. Really hearing the meaning of their words, really trying to understand the meaning behind their words and understand where they're coming from. Asking questions. This could be clarifying questions to better understand or really just help them feel like you're listening to their words. I think in the overall strategy, these last 2 are important. Anticipating needs. To me, there is no better demonstration of understanding than being able to anticipate what this person might need in the future. And then advocating for others. I think this is just a display of genuine care about growth and happiness if you're advocating for others. When I think about empathy, I think about it in 2 ways. A manager can express empathy for an employee's personal circumstance. And then I think the second is communication. I think it would be remiss if I didn't say personal touch and compassion goes a long way with employees. It needs to be authentic. I wouldn't want to come across as dishonest or ingenuine. But for the purposes of what we're talking about today, I really was going to focus on communication. So, according to research done by the University of Illinois, when employees receive rude emails at work, they tend to experience negativity at home. The negativity spills over into our personal lives, and we take it home, and we might be impatient with a roommate, we might be impatient with a spouse. And basically what it means is if we're unhappy at work, we're unhappy at home. And if we're unhappy, we're probably less likely to help others. So employees are not willing to go the extra mile when they know their manager wouldn't go the extra mile. Stress at work leads to less collaboration. It's a deteriorating experience for employees, for clients or customers, would lead to more turnover, and then it does lead to low performance. So to create an environment where employees are engaged, performing, and happy to come to work, the leadership must be taking an approach with empathy. It's an approach that leads with the employees being the first priority and the work or outcome being the second priority. I'm going to repeat it because it's important. Employees first, the outcome second. And it comes back to us twofold because this approach drives stronger performance because the employees are happy, taking pride in the work. They're satisfied. They're helping others because, again, everybody's taking pride in the work. And they're willing to go above and beyond because their manager goes above and beyond. So I wanted to take a second and touch on 3 examples that are really this in practice. So I mentioned I mentor a couple of managers, and often they'll come to me and share examples. And so I had somebody come to me not that long ago who was hiring a support professional, so basically a staff member for a large advisor team. And when she'd come to me, she was very frustrated. because the advisor had gone and sought a candidate and placed the interviews and decided they wanted to hire this person without really bringing her into the conversation. And so she's frustrated because she's going to be the direct supervisor for this employee, but she feels like her authority is undermined from the onset because she's being brought in second. And so she interviews the candidate, ultimately decides she does not think we should move forward. She doesn't want to hire the person. And so she goes to the advisor and she says, first, I'm frustrated that you brought me in second. And I think in her mind, she was thinking I could have saved us time. But she just says to him, I don't know, why you didn't bring me in the loop sooner. I met with so-and-so and I've decided we should not hire them. And so basically kind of a battle ensues between the two of them because the advisor thinks it's retribution. So I didn't bring you in the loop and now you're going to sabotage our hire. Are you basically telling me that you're going to block us from hiring this person? And she's saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to tell you it's not the right person. And so she comes to me sort of very frustrated. I know the advisor and she's asking me, how do you communicate with them? I can't seem to get anywhere. I started basically taking those 4 A's and incorporating into my conversation with her. I'm listening to what she's saying. I'm asking clarifying questions and I'm asking her, why didn't you think it was the right candidate? And she's explaining, it's not who they're looking for. And I know their team and this is not what they told me they wanted. And so I say to her, let me just role play with you for a minute. And if you use these words when you were communicating with him, how do you think he would have reacted? And so I told her, if you had said, I've been hiring support roles as a career for the past 20 years. I met with your team and I asked you to describe the ideal candidate to me. I've also worked with your team for 10 years and I know your communication style. I've spoken with the staff about how they approach tasks and I've seen how you approach clients. I've also sat in on all your annual business planning meetings for the past few years. I know your team's goals and aspirations for the practice. And when I considered all of these factors, I asked very pointed questions to this candidate to learn what they're really about. And I know this candidate is not the right fit because she doesn't have the traits that you described to me were most important for success. I'm looking out for your team and I want to do what's best for the team, but I'm certain we can find a better candidate together. I said, did you let the advisor know why you didn't think it was the right candidate? She said no. And I said, do you think he would have reacted differently if you would have shared that with him? And she said, I definitely think he would have. I'd never thought about it this way. I mean, I validated her decision not to hire the candidate because it was for the right reasons. But I explained to her that while her intentions were correct, the communication style was preventing the team from understanding it was coming from a place of value and partnership. In another example, I received a couple of, a flurry of urgent items because I had a tenured team and a very inexperienced service professional that had just started working together. And so she'd probably been with the team for less than 6 months. And between the two of them, communication was a challenge. One item in particular that I thought was interesting is that this young professional who, in her first few months had always been at work on time, but lately had been showing up 10 to 15 minutes late every day. And so the tenure team is getting incredibly frustrated. It's a bad habit and they not really sure how to break it and who on the team's going to talk to her about it. And so they kind of appoint one of them to have a conversation with her. But the approach they took was to have a formal meeting and sit down and talk about expectations. And so she outlined, this is what we expect from you. This is the behavior that we expect from you. You need to be at work by 8 o'clock every day. Kind of end of discussion. So over the next 3 to 5 days, she did get to work before 8 o'clock. All of us, especially if you live here in Nashville, know about traffic. So you never know what to expect. You would build in a buffer, a 10 to 15 minute buffer to make sure that if your boss just talked to you about being to work on time, you want to make sure you don't take a chance to be late to work. And so she was showing up to work 10 to 15 minutes early. And so the team then got frustrated because they thought she was trying to send a message. And so one of them chastised her and said, "We get it. You know how to come to work on time. You don't have to get here before the rest of us." And she was just sort of exhausted with the process. I take a step back and I think to myself, in that formal conversation when they talked about not being on time, if that person had taken more of an empathetic approach and asked, "Hey, I've noticed that you've started coming to work 10 to 15 minutes late, and I wondered why," and just kind of asked an open-ended question, a couple things could have happened. It's possible that she just would have realized she was wrong. It's possible that posing that question could have kind of reminded her that she's slacking and she needs to be at work on time. And maybe that would cause a change in behavior. The other thing that could have happened is more of a larger conversation. And in this case, if they would have asked her and she felt compelled to share, she probably would have told them that she didn't feel like she had a purpose and she didn't feel like she was part of the team. She thought that her job was worthless and she was late every day because, quite honestly, she was dreading coming to work because she was absolutely miserable. So kind of this blow up that happened, it resulted in them deciding mutually to separate. And we were able to move her to another team that she's actually thriving in, doing very well. And I would tell you the biggest difference between them, besides a little bit of communication, is that the second team was really able to show her the future and the growth and what things that she had to accomplish to get to the next level. And I think she was really looking for that clear path to what was next. The last one I'll share is a discussion about career advancement. And so sometimes when we're not proactively having conversations about career advancement, people sort of take things into their own hands. And so a manager called me and said, "You won't believe this. Somebody just came in my office and just caught me off guard and told me that she had done research on the system and she had identified a new title and she was ready for promotion." And the manager said, "I was just caught so off guard. I just think this is ridiculous, not how it's done." And so she said, "I just kind of blurted out, 'That's too big of a stretch for you.'" I was like, "Okay, well, how did that go?" She said, "Well, she was very upset and she went to her advisor and her advisor went to the market executive, kind of the big boss. And she'd already gotten a phone call just asking what had happened. And I said to her, "Well, how do you think she felt in that moment?" And she said, "I think she felt defeated." I said, "Have you ever felt that way?" She's like, "Well, I've certainly felt like my voice wasn't heard." And I said, "What if you revisit that conversation?" And it's okay for us to recover. It's okay to come back and say, "Listen, I reacted too quickly," or "I didn't ask enough questions," or "After some reflection, I think it's time for us to have kind of a bigger conversation." I said, go back to her and really listen. Ask questions and try to figure out, where is this coming from? Is she looking for more responsibility? Is she looking for another title because she just wants to challenge herself? Does she look for different pay? Is she looking to make more money? So in this conversation, they sit down and sort of outline everything, her goals, truly, where she's heading, what she's looking for. And the outcome is that together, they've sort of armed the manager with all the information they need to take the next step. And so she's able to go back to her desk and look through possibilities, think about different job titles, get with her boss. And ultimately, the good news is they find a job description that allows them to accomplish everyone's goal. It's one that is a new title with a new pay structure and some new job responsibilities, but all something that they feel like she's able, and it's a situation where the manager feels like she can sign off, like it's truly something that they can work on together. So I I'll move to, empathy and if it's not your natural tendency, seems to be a little bit overwhelming. But really, it's not something to be afraid of because it is something that with coaching and work, it's learned over time. The communication is definitely a change in perspective. That's all it's about. Changing the way you approach communication can be perfected over time. The best part about this approach, in my opinion, is the time. Because of the approach, you have plenty of time to think, to pause, ponder, ask questions, buy time, because the whole purpose is being thoughtful and listening. You can certainly take your time and reflect. You can ask if you can think it over and then come back to the individual. Because sometimes for me, especially, it's helpful if I can take the time to think about what's next. Eventually, in practice, you get to the point where you can think on your feet in the approach and then can wrap up all of these items in the single meeting. Anytime I'm talking to someone about communication, I remind them of these 4 A's: actively listen, ask questions, anticipate their needs, and advocate. The greatest benefit of empathy is the building of relationships because we are in these relationships for the long haul. The goal is to share that you understand, thoughtfully respond to feelings and thoughts and circumstances. And the reason we care about these things is because this is what drives behavior. And at the end of the day, isn't that what all of us are trying to do as leaders? We're trying to influence and drive behavior. And I believe when a decision is made by a manager viewed as empathetic, there is greater buy-in and cooperation. Emotional intelligence is the ability to connect feelings and values to experiences. It's an understanding of the challenges and an offer to help. So approaching scenarios using this leads to employees feeling motivated, engaged, and inspired. I believe this authentic leadership drives success in innovation, retention, inclusivity, and leads to a higher overall engagement because everyone has the same goal, and that's the goal of growth. So thank you for your time.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for that presentation. Lots of value here. Thank you so much. So I think we've got time for maybe 2 questions that have come in from our listeners today. I'm going to start with this one from Anya, and she says, "I think I am empathetic. How do I know? Is there a quiz I can take?"
There probably is an online quiz. To me, I think I see it in people's sharing. I would know I was empathetic if in the process of us discussing things, they're sharing with me. And I think at some point, someone will say to you, it's that word understanding. Like, gosh, thank you so much for listening, or you're a great listener. Those are definitely key things that tell me I'm doing the right thing. Or they'll say, you know me, or I appreciate how much you care. I think some of those key words would truly be the indication that people view you as empathetic.
Well said. Thank you. All right, this is going to be our final question, and then we'll ask you if you have any final words of wisdom for all of our viewers today. And Erica says, "I want to be an empathetic leader, but I do not want to be seen as a pushover. I am kind, but I don't want to be taken advantage of. Can I be firm and show empathy?"
Absolutely. You can I manage about 100 people. I think they would all tell you that I'm incredibly empathetic, but I am incredibly firm. I used to think, to your point, that explaining why I was doing something was me basically showing weakness. I'm not confident in my decision, and so I'm going to explain to you why I made this decision, and hopefully you'll start to understand. In time, they really started to respect the fact that I was explaining my decision because I wasn't budging. My point to them was I took a lot of time to be thoughtful and consider before I made the decision. And so it's really, to me, about understanding. And I think us explaining why we're doing something or how we arrived at that decision, that is, in fact, us being firm because we're really saying, I'm not going to budge on this one.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So before we move to our final panel of the day, do you have any words of wisdom for all of our viewers?
Honestly, it's listen more and talk less. I think that, and I've heard this over and over with some of our presenters, listening to me is the best way to really basically be able to influence.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your time today, Amy.
Thank you.